Good evening, and thank you so much for coming here tonight. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. I'm Deborah Raskin. I'm president of the New York City Bar Association, and I am delighted to welcome you all to this great occasion. I'm so pleased to have our distinguished speaker, Justice Sotomayor. It's such an honor to have her here at the City Bar Association, and I'm looking forward to her remarks this evening, as I'm sure all of you are. But this is also a special evening because we are celebrating the culmination of our first year of the New York City Bar's New Lawyer Institute. The New Lawyer Institute is the first initiative to come out of the City Bar Task Force on new lawyers in a changing profession. In November 2013, the task force issued a groundbreaking report on the legal profession and on the plight of new lawyers. We found that the current legal education model does not necessarily prepare lawyers fully to enter the workforce practice ready. And the task force issued a number of concrete proposals calling for the City Bar to create the New Lawyer Institute. And create it we did. The New Lawyer Institute Advisory Committee, which is chaired by Lori Burke-Weiss, first convened in early 2014 and built the program from the ground up. Remarkably, in September 2014, the New Lawyer Institute was launched with its first class and with a full curriculum on career development, practice management, practice readiness, various areas of the law, and other trained skills. Also included were substantive CLE courses, mentoring, networking opportunities that many of the experienced lawyers here helped us to present. And we also showed the members of the New Lawyer Institute all the opportunities that the City Bar has to offer. A little plug there. In the first year, 84 law graduates from 9 New York law schools participated in the program, and 7 of those schools are sponsors. And I'd like to take a minute to thank the sponsoring law schools: Brooklyn, Cardozo, Columbia, CUNY, Fordham, Hofstra, and New York Law School. None of this could have been done without their support. Not only did they assist us financially, but Lori and her committee relied on their advice, their counsel, and guidance while creating this program. So thank you again to our sponsors. And a special thank you to staff member Martha Harris, who has worked endlessly, tirelessly, cheerfully on this project throughout the past year, while still keeping up to speed on everything else she has to do for the City Bar. So yay, Martha. Our goal through the New Lawyer Institute was to get the participants practice ready as soon as possible by helping them develop their skills, by immersing them in the New York City legal profession. And we hope that that's what we have done. Now, as with any first-time program, we've learned a lot from our experiences and from our participants and are hoping to make this an even better program next year. We're already planning for next year's New Lawyer Institute program, and this spring we'll be reaching out to area law schools, asking them to sponsor the next year of the program and to encourage their recent graduates to apply. We hope that all of this year's sponsors will join us again, and that those law schools who didn't sponsor will come into the fold. And finally, to our inaugural class of participants, we are so proud of you. Yay, so give yourselves a hand. We hope that your participation in the New Lawyer Institute was valuable to you. And I also hope that you see the City Bar Association as your professional home, and that you'll continue to look to the City Bar as a place where you can grow, both professionally and personally. We'll be here for you as a place where you can thrive in the good times and get some support in the not such good times. This is a place where you can also give back to those in need, and a place to mentor and encourage the new lawyers who are coming after you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Lori Berkweiss, who was the chair of the advisory committee to the New Lawyer Institute, to introduce our distinguished speaker.
Good evening, and thank you, Debbie, for your leadership and unwavering support for the New Lawyer Institute. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing Justice Sonia Sotomayor and thanking her for sharing this capstone event with the New Lawyer Institute participants, representatives from their sponsoring law schools, City Bar members who worked on the New Lawyer Institute's projects and programs, and their guests. Justice Sotomayor, herself a longtime member of the City Bar, joins us as we celebrate the first year of an extraordinary initiative. She is the final speaker in the New Lawyer Institute Speaker Series, which has been open to all new law school graduates. Tonight, I will not go through the Justice's well-known resume in detail, other than to note that her modest beginnings in the Bronx marked the start of an unconventional route to the federal bench. Educated in Catholic schools, she went to Princeton, and after graduating from Yale Law School, served as an assistant district attorney in New York County. She practiced intellectual property law at a small firm in Manhattan, Pavia and Harcourt, before being nominated to the district court. Thereafter, Justice Sotomayor was elevated to the Second Circuit and ultimately to the U.S. Supreme Court, where we all know that she serves with distinction as its first Latina justice. Justice Sotomayor's inspiring memoir, My Beloved World, shows us the determination, resilience, and hard work which are the hallmarks of her journey. As her memoir recounts, Justice Sotomayor had many challenges, but always remained open to opportunities. She built strong professional networks in the legal profession and maintained family ties and close friendships. As such, the New Lawyer Institute Advisory Committee believes no one is better qualified to speak how to make the most of opportunities open to law school graduates and the importance of challenging yourself to achieve your dreams. Please join me in welcoming Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Thank you. It is always wonderful for me to be home, and New York City is home, as has been and was for me for many years this house, because I've spent a lot of time here. And so for all of you who are part of this place and who do so much good through it and with it, I thank you all. Deborah and Lori, you're such special people. Thank you very much, and to all of the City Bar's family. Thank you not just for hosting me, but for this program, because I think you identified a need that's both genuine and have answered the call to try to help solve it in a real way. And not all the time do lawyers figure out practical solutions. And I remember starting out at my firm and one of the managing partners saying that to me. You always have to remember to give the lawyers advice, but then you find an answer for your client. And so that's what you've done, and thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's participated in making this program a reality. There's a lot of friends in the audience that I see who have done that. Any of you read my book ever, you'll know that I was not a well-behaved child, despite my mother rewriting history after I became a judge, all right? And one day I had to say, Ma, take off the rose-colored glasses. I was a terror. But I had a lot of energy, and I still do. And I hate standing behind podiums. So I'm not. I'm going to wander among you. I think that gives everybody in the front and back a chance to see me, and it lets me get some of my energy out. How's that? However, you will see a lot of guys and gals with little earplugs in their ears, like that one. They get nervous when I go into the audience. And they get even more nervous if people jump up and come at me in any way. So while I'm wandering around, just stay seated. Don't make them nervous. Because remember something, they have the power to pull me off the floor, okay? So I will do this, and I just hope you'll cooperate. How's that? All right. You're going to get your money's worth tonight. I've been told a little bit about some of the things the prior speakers have been talking to you about. And to the extent that our stories share similarities, you're going to hear some of the same things. But I was trying to figure out how to talk to you, to engage you, perhaps, I hope, in a new way. And so I will try. Some of you gave me some ideas, and so I'll try to incorporate them as I go along, okay? I am often asked by school children whether I dreamed of becoming a Supreme Court justice when I was a child. And my answer is no. Grew up in a housing project in the Bronx. Who ever heard about the Supreme Court in a Bronx housing project? There were no lawyers there, so I didn't even really know what lawyers were. And I certainly didn't know what they did. My first exposures to lawyering was Perry Mason. And that's a very limited slice of the legal profession. So how did a kid from the South Bronx end up on the Supreme Court? Certainly wasn't from planning, because there was no way to dream about something you don't know about. A lot of hard work, yes, but I think any success in life requires that in any field. Anything worth doing is only worth doing if you're going to do it well, and you're going to work hard at it. And that includes, by the way, any job you do and any volunteering you do. I tell young lawyers who belong to bar associations like this, don't just show up at meetings, do something at them. Show people the value of you. And just sitting there is not going to do it. You have to show them how hard you're willing to work and how hard you're willing to learn. And that will move you forward in people's eyes. So serendipity led me to Princeton. I didn't know what Ivy League schools were when I was applying in high school. A friend from high school who had gone to Princeton before me called me up in the fall of my senior year and said, "Sonia, you have to apply to the Ivy League schools." My first question was, "What's that?" He said, very simply, "The best colleges in the United States." My next statement was, "I can't afford that." And he said, "They'll give you a scholarship, don't worry." And the third question was, "Well, do they charge to apply? I can't even afford that." And he said, "Yes, but they'll waive it, don't worry." This is the day before the internet. There was no real way of doing research on these schools. They gave you a prepared booklet with a lot of pictures, a little bit of descriptions about the courses, but there was not the sort of research that's being done today where you can actually learn about the institution in an intimate way. You can get online and talk to people in the school to tell you what the plus and minuses are. It was a leap of faith for me to take my friend at his word and say, I should do that. And that's what lawyering, for those people who come from backgrounds like mine, and that's generally most of you, right? Who don't have lawyers in your family, who probably, for many of you, you're the first to go to college. I was. Well, not the first to go to college, I was the first to graduate. And that's a bit of a difference, but I had a lot of cousins who came before me who had started and never finished. That was actually my first life dream, just finish college. And so how do you take that leap of faith when you're racked by fear? Anybody who ever tells you that they're not scared in every single endeavor they try, that's a person who has an ego too big for him or her, or who is just plain lying. Okay? Because there is no way that something you don't know about can't have some dread for you. It's a natural human condition. And learning how to live with fear. Mind you, I didn't say conquer it, I said live with it, is the hardest challenge I think that every one of you will have in life generally, but in the pursuit of your career. Every legal job I've gotten, including at the DA's office, district court judge, circuit court judge, Supreme Court justice, I have been scared. So how do you live with it? You sort of look at it in the face. You talk to friends who remind you how far you've gotten. All of you in this room who are the first college graduate, or all of you who never knew a lawyer, and really don't know that many, except your classmates, think of how far you've gotten. You've gotten further than most people that you know in your life. And that you sometimes need to be reminded. Because we forget our accomplishments in our desire to get somewhere else, and we let that fear sort of fester in us. And so I really have very good friends. And every time I've been really, really scared, they've helped me by reminding me of how far I've come. Happened when the Supreme Court process was going on. I almost pulled out. And if it hadn't been for friends who knocked me over the head and kicked my posterior, I think I may have made a mistake. And so it does take, that's the thing you have to conquer the most. Now, what's the second thing you have to conquer? Fear. Fear of failure. Every single person has to fear failure because it's embarrassing, because it lets yourself down from your own expectations, and because sometimes you feel you're letting other people down who've put so much faith in you. And that kind of fear has its own debilitating effect. For a lot of people, it means they don't try new things. They don't take those leaps of faith I was talking about. And so that is the second thing that you have to conquer, is that fear. Now, I mentioned the fear for one reason. For most of us coming from the background we do, the only kind of lawyering you know is the one that you've seen on television, or the standard kind of lawyering that you see the corporate lawyers in this room and the DAs and the others who have. The magic of the law profession is that people do so many different things with it. Don't track yourself into the standard. Reach out more broadly. To do that, you have to self-evaluate yourself in a very honest way. You can't imagine what you are with those rose-colored glasses that my mother uses, okay? I knew coming out of law school that I hadn't gotten it yet. I had not figured out how to be a lawyer. And the proof in the pudding was that I went to a big law firm, like most of my classmates at Yale, and I didn't get an offer after my summer. That stung. And it did make me afraid. But I knew that it wasn't the law firm's fault, it really was my fault. Didn't really understand what lawyering was about, how to analyze facts to the law, how to really make persuasive arguments that could forward a legal paper. And so I tried to figure out, how am I going to learn this? Because I'm missing that skill. And what I decided first was, I'm not going back to a big law firm. I'm going to try a small one, where maybe I'll get more personal attention. And then happenstance hit, and I walked into a panel on pro bono service. And Bob Morgenthau, the DA, was talking, and he said, you know, the one thing I can promise you in a job with me is that within a year, you will have tried one or more cases. And I knew from my mock trials that I had a skill for trial work. And I figured, let me do that. And let me see what I can do while I'm there to learn how to be a good lawyer. So I went to the DA's office. I did trial work, but I was one of the few DAs who did not shy away from doing the appellate briefs. Everybody was supposed to do one a year. I was there for 4.5 years, and I did 8. And I did that because I knew it would start getting me more accustomed to what being a lawyer was. It was the best step I ever took. So I then decided, okay, after 4.5 years, not that I had learned everything I could learn from the prosecutor's office, but that I didn't want to be in criminal law because I personally saw it as a revolving door. I remember the moment that I was in the complaint where you receive new cases, and I picked up a file, and I didn't read who the arresting officer was or who the defendant was. I went straight to the facts, and they were identical facts to a case I had tried almost 2 years before, 3 years before. And I looked up, and it was the same defendant. And that was the moment I said, okay, it's time to leave. If I'm going to make a difference in life, it's not going to be in this position. And I started thinking about what my community might need, and I realized economic development. Because criminal law was the back end of the problem. The front end of the problem is the economic needs of all of our communities. So, but instead of going into public service, I realized I knew nothing about economics except a 101 introductory course I had taken in college. But I looked for a small commercial firm. I was still afraid of the big one. So I decided, not a big one, I'm not ready yet. I need to protect my ego a little bit. But I'll try a small one. And I'll work as hard as I can there. And that's what I did. And I became a partner. And then I started thinking about public service work, and I started interviewing with a variety of different city and federal organizations. But none of the jobs seemed quite right. And I kept holding on. And a dear, dear partner at my firm, who became an incredible mentor to me, he was the managing partner of the litigation department, told me to apply to Moynihan's Judicial Selection Committee for the district. I told him he was crazy. At the time of the application, I was 36 years old. And I said, that senator is not crazy. He's not going to nominate a 36-year-old. Felt like a baby still. I was a baby. And by the way, as an aside, I would never recommend to a president to put people as young as me in judicial positions. I think it's nuts. But I've been the beneficiary, and I can only say that a little bit, okay? At any rate, I refused to do it. I went away on vacation one Christmas, right after Christmas, And I came back and my desk was completely empty. And in the middle of the table of the desk was Moynihan's selection committee application. And I went running into my managing partner, David, and said to him, David, what are you thinking of? I told you this was crazy. Give me my work back. And he said, not until you fill this out. So, it wasn't my leap of faith, it was his. He really pushed me into it, and I'm glad. It was, being on the district court was a tremendous experience. Now, a lot of you, I'm an exception. I've gotten to do in the legal profession much more than I ever dreamed I would do. I've gotten further than I ever imagined was humanly possible. And not everybody can be a Supreme Court justice. Just physical reality limits that possibility. There's 9 justices. We've got jobs for life. In your lifetime, if the court turns around once, that's a lot. So if you can't live expecting that you'll achieve all your dreams, and most of us never quite get to, the places that our back imagination would like us to reach, how do you become satisfied? How do you keep present in the profession? How do you motivate yourself? And I think the way you do it is by looking at everything you do, in whatever position you get, as an opportunity to learn something new. I've loved every job I've had, even though I've been angry at various points in the job. Karen will tell you, we were at the DA's office together. There were plenty of nights we cursed a lot of things. But what I mean about that is, it doesn't matter how boring your job is, and there's a lot of boredom in law, all right? I review every year over 8,500 cert petitions. If you don't think that can get tedious, you don't know what it's like to do it. So how do I stay involved? Because I challenge myself to be more efficient at it, to look at and imagine what the holes in the case may or may not be, what is important in them. And so I keep myself motivated by looking to see what I can learn better each day about that process. And it's what's kept me happy as a judge for 25 years. And I do a lot of it now by looking at my colleagues. I look at what they do well, and I try to figure out how I can copy that. I ask them, sometimes I just talk to them and say, how is it and why is it that you approach things this way? Any job you're in, you're going to see people doing things that you don't know how to do, or doing things better than you know how. Don't ever be afraid of going up to them and saying, I noticed that you did this really well. What were you thinking of? What motivated you in that approach? Talk to people. If you force people to think about why they're doing things, they will explain it. Everybody has ego. And if you say to somebody they've done something well, they're going to help you. No, seriously. I mean, there's the occasional sourpuss who might say no. But that's an occasional person. And so look at each job, not for the boredom of what you're involved in, but for the opportunity to step forward and maybe learn something new. Use it as a vehicle to learn what someone else is doing that's interesting you. But it takes what I described earlier. You have to evaluate yourself and see what your strengths and weaknesses are. There are some people who are just shy. Some people whose English speaking abilities are a little bit more limited than other abilities. I had a young student who interned with me years and years ago when I was on the district court bench. She just came with her daughter to visit me at the Supreme Court. She was Asian American, and her English was limited. And she took a job that I had never heard of. She went into the military, not as a soldier, but as a civilian lawyer. How many of you know that there are civilian lawyers in every office, legal office in the Army, Navy? A lot of raising your hand, but a lot of you are not. All right? She found her niche. She loved contract law. She's now a supervisor. She's raising a daughter, and she's really happy. That's that. Know what your opportunities are? Think outside the box. Think about the possibilities of agencies. Almost every one of them has a legal office. And you may not get a job there, but you might volunteer. The best way to show people your interest is by volunteering. Go in and say, I happen to like this law. It's an interesting field for me. I'd like to learn it a little bit. Can I volunteer once a week? Some of you are working during the day, and that may be hard to do. But if you can do it, that's an avenue. Same thing with public interest work. Today, those jobs are hotly sought after. When I came out of law school, I could have any job I wanted. That wouldn't be the case today. And it certainly wouldn't be the case in a lot of the public interest jobs, where you're competing with people who are at the top of their class at Yale and Harvard. My Supreme Court law clerks are going in to be federal defenders. That competition's a little tough for anybody to meet, okay? But if you go and ask to be an intern, and you work really, really hard and well at what you're doing, they will help you. I can't tell you how many letters I got as a district court judge and a circuit court judge, and even some today as the Supreme Court, about young lawyers who started out either as paralegals in those offices, or who started out as a student, but they did so well that a lawyer in those offices is writing to me about hiring them. I know I'm talking about things that won't help you with your school loans. And it's nice if you can go get one of those other jobs I was talking about and think about alternatives. Every government office hires lawyers. Don't think of the Department of Justice. Don't think of the Solicitor General's office. Think about every enterprise, the housing department, the transportation department, the Department of Education. You may have to start on the bottom. You may have to take a job in those offices that's not the job you want, but it's a foothold, it's a toehold in those positions. And the start is what gives you the opportunity to grow. And so, what's my final bit of personal advice? I love and have always loved being a lawyer. And that's because, to me, the legal profession is the noblest of all professions. Doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, which says, do no harm, but their code of ethics don't tell them they have to do pro bono work. Ours says we must. And what do you do, or what you should be thinking of what you do every day? You serve people. You help them either get out of problems, or avoid problems, or better their relationships, do their business in a better way. We help people in their human endeavors. In every aspect of their life, lawyers are involved. Name the business, a lawyer is involved. Name a human dynamic, a lawyer is involved. And if you think about what lawyering should be, it's service to people. And if you do it with a sense of your own personal integrity, your own sense of commitment to the profession as a profession, and to people in a caring and dignified way, you will love the law, hopefully as much as I do. Don't let the financial stress, the stresses of the profession that drive you in terms of heavy workloads, especially if you're in government. There's never enough resources. Partners who are overly demanding, clients who are unappreciative. You have to put all of that aside and remain focused within yourself about why you got into this. What it is that you want to do as a lawyer and a human being. And if you can stay there, you will find a way to profession. So, for all those young lawyers, I said I would repeat some of the themes. I'm sorry, I have. But I hope that no matter how hard it is, don't give up. You can sidestep it and do something else, even in an office that you'd want to be the lawyer, but you're going to end up being the paralegal to start with. There's always that oh, sorry. Gosh, I hope I don't start this again. Anyway, I think I've talked enough. Maybe I should let you ask me questions now? All right. Now, this is the way I stimulate questions. You can't ask me about cases, okay? Or political issues that is in the news. Every one of them ends up in the court, okay? But you can ask me anything about the general, how the Supreme Court works. But I think for those in the NLI program, ask the questions I haven't answered, okay? Identify yourself. And the inducement for you to get over your shyness, I take a personal picture with everybody who asks a question. You raise your hand first.
I can stand? It's okay.
You can stand. Tell me your name.
All right, Tyrone Blackburn.
Hello. Where are you in the program?
No.
Okay. And what do you do?
I work for Morgan Stanley. I'm a recent graduate of Seton Hall Law School.
Become rich, unlike the rest of us.
That's my plan.
All right. Good.
Okay, so
How about taking a picture? You'll learn how to multitask.
thank you. So my question is, how do you manage personalities when you change jobs or you start new careers or you go into new offices? Like, how do you deal with individuals who are older than you or who have been there, like the baby boomers? No offense to any baby boomers in the room, but how do you deal with that as a new young lawyer going into these different industries?
Up until now, the Supreme Court, I've been the youngest person in every room I've been in. Business room, except the DA's office. Okay? And that's not easy. But one of the things that helps is having an attitude that understand that people who have paid their dues do know what they're talking about. And you always have to be respectful of it. Because whether it's a path or a learning that you accept or reject, you should listen respectfully. And frankly, sometimes fighting with people is just unnecessary. You know, when I was in Pavilion Harcourt, one of the partners that I had loved me. She was a woman. She came on from her sick bed to vote on my partnership. She and her family were staunch Republican supporters. She came to me one day and said, "Sonia, you have to join the Republican Party." It's over politics in the foreseeable future. Actually, she turned out to be right. Reagan got elected. After that, the Republicans, up until really Clinton, took over the profession. And I knew that she was right, that the country was changing and politics was changing. I listened to her, and I finally looked at her and said, and I listened, and I never said, it's a bad idea, because it wasn't a bad idea. It was just something I couldn't do. It wasn't within my conscience. And that's what I said to her slowly. Not because I didn't think that the Republicans had platforms that I could agree with, but I had purposely become an independent because I didn't want to be tied to anyone's platform. I wanted to be able to make my own independent choices, and that's what I explained to her. So you're going to get advice that you don't want to follow. Now, what do you do when you know you're right and they're wrong? Well, sometimes, even when they're wrong, you can't convince them. Sometimes I had discussions with partners, or I've had it with some of my colleagues, and I come back and say, I'm going to write a memo. I'm not convincing you when I'm speaking to you. And occasionally you convince people in writing. So you try different tacks. Sometimes I've gone to another person who has more influence on them than I do. And I explain what the problem is and ask them whether they think that it's a position they might want to help me with. And I even do that on the Supreme Court. And one of them will go and try to talk the other person into doing the right thing. There are different strategies, but you have to start from respect. Because if you don't start there, they're never going to listen to you. And that, people ask us how we get along on the Supreme Court when we have such divergent views. And if you read some of our decisions, you know that we can be nasty to each other. All right, so how do you walk away from that? You walk away from it when you start from my position, which is, I know that all 8 of my colleagues are as passionate about the Constitution and our Republican form of government as I am. We are all deeply, deeply involved in trying to make sure that our decisions are the right one. And that passion can lead you to sometimes being a little bit more expressive than you should, good behavior should lead you to be. And you also notice a lot that the people who are most impassioned are the ones losing. Because they're thinking you got it wrong, and they want to shake you and say, please rethink this. And so if you can respect what drives that, you can forgive their excesses. If you can respect the dues that others have paid to get where they've gotten to, then it'll be easier for you to accept when they don't treat you as an equal. Now, I want a student to ask me a question. Only students can raise their hands right now. All right, you were up first then.
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
I call students the new lawyers, okay?
I'm Rebecca Sotomayor. I'm in the Launch Your Career Series program here, New York City Bar Association. I'm a pre-law student, and I live in a housing project in Woodside, Queens. And I wanted to ask you about your Yale Law School application.
Mm-hmm.
Just any insights, just as a Latina from the project.
I mean, Yale has a tiny, tiny class.
Yeah.
It's only about 150 students, law students, LLMs, and maybe another 20 or 25 students who are in the master's program. It may have grown a little bit. So it's the hardest school to get in. And frankly, if I had known that, I may never have applied, so I didn't know. Now, my resume was unique in itself because I came out of Princeton, which is one of their feeder schools, and I happened to have performed really well there, also of value to them. But I had also been involved in a lot of community work. And so a lot of my resume was not about how much I had done, but what my vision of the world was and the contributions that I hoped I might be able to do. And in explaining that, I drew upon some of the things I had been doing. It wasn't like I was leaving them aside, but I was trying to have the description become the method of showing a gold. And I think that that really is what resumes are about. not resumes, but applications. Too many students talk about their hardships. Well, the reality is a lot of people have hardships. A lot of people. And so, not that they can feel for you, but I think what they want to see is what you're doing with them. Where are you going? What is it that they've taught you, as opposed to a description of what you've overcome? So good luck in it.
Thank you.
Yes? Oh, I almost forgot that, sorry. All right, I'm going to each section. So who's in the next section? All right. You're one of the students, right?
I'm a student, yes.
Yes, student, I should say new lawyer, I'm sorry.
New lawyer.
Come on out, so we can take our picture too.
Absolutely. My name is Mark Ramirez. I'm a 2L at CUNY Law. Sorry. So you talked about being in a room with people who are older, or at firms with people who are older and know more than you, have more experience. But when you're sitting on a Supreme Court that are people that don't know your experience, who haven't been in a project, haven't lived in a project, speaking to so many things that affect your life and our lives. I grew up on the Lower East Side back when it was the Lower East Side back in the day. It's harder I don't want to say you want to lack respect for their opinions, but it's kind of hard to accept that they understand what the little man is going through, what the small person is going through, what the people in our communities are going through. So it's kind of hard to defer in a situation like that.
That's why I'm there.
Right, and I want
And that's what I remember, all right? You have to have a purpose in life. As one of my colleagues told me, actually after my first year, I went to talk to him and said, why am I here? What is it I'm bringing to this process? And he said to me, Sonia, every new justice asks themselves that question. It tortures you for a very long time. And he then said to me, I figured out that I had to accept that if life put me here, then I have a purpose even if I can not identify it. I have to bring to this process all of my learning, my best thinking, my best contributions as a judge, he was now a justice, but as a judge and as a human being. And that was very comforting to me because yes, there are conversations. It's much easier, so I don't step on other things, to say that one of the great contributions I make, particularly in the certiorari review process, is to talk to them about the experience of being a district court judge, because none of them were. And it has affected decisions to deny or accept cert. And sometimes it doesn't make a difference, because they think they know better, okay? No, seriously, it just happens that way. But I also know they have had experiences I haven't. And so to the extent that they talk to me about things, there have been moments where I realized that there were reasons driving their choices that I would not have thought of, and that have changed my mind. Because it's a two-way street, that learning process. It's never a one-way street. That's why I don't, I certainly don't envy their lives. For many of them, I wish I was as rich as they are. The life is a lot easier when you have a little money, okay? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But anger in those situations is useless anger. It doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't change anything. People become uncomfortable with real anger. They become uncomfortable with emotion. But sometimes you do have to get emotional to get their attention. But other times you have to be more solicitous and more sort of drawing them in. There's no one technique in life, but it has to start with respect, because you're not going to get anywhere without it. Now, no student, new lawyers, participants of the program. Where's did I start? Over here with you. I asked, let someone here. I'm going over here. All right, you raise your hand. Hello again.
Hello again.
You get a single picture now.
When you're confronted with the question that's very new, and you're confronted with someone who has that anger, that passion in the opposite direction to you, how do you get the confidence? And it's a narrow question. How do you get the confidence to tell them they're wrong? Yes.
One.
That's a really interesting question because
Sometimes the dynamic is where people want to push you into things. And I've seen some of my colleagues try to do it to someone. And even I have probably participated a little bit in some of it. Because when you're right, you really want to push the other person. But that's what judging is. It's about being able to articulate a position and explain why it's right. If you can't explain in a code why you believe not that the other person, but then that you're right, then you'll be pushed around. But once you've thought through your position and you've made judgments balancing the pros and cons, then you should have an. And sometimes you have to say, and I've done it for this state over there, I'll think of that. And I walk away and go Sometimes you have to be practical. I'm gonna go across the room near the back. You raise your hand first. Go ahead. Tell me your name again. Come on out. I guess if there's students back here, you can. Not students. Ask your question.
So I'm actually in a different position. I was actually admitted today to School of Law.
Congratulations.
So I guess my question is, what advice would you give to a student?
Than the rest of these people. How I handled law school was still very valuable, and I think I told the earlier. I went into law school and took all the traditional subjects, not just the first year, but I took subjects that I thought that every lawyer should know. Taxation, business, commercial business, estates planning. Today it's probably called family law or property law, although property law you can not family. I took a civil rights course, but I majored, by the way, my focus in law school. Despite taking a lot of international law courses, I understood that if to be a lawyer, to be a well-rounded lawyer, I needed to fill out my background and understand the principles in every major area of law. And I'll tell you, and I took some things that just interested me, an admiralty course. So how did it become handy? I got to my firm, Pavilion. I was there 4 or 5 months, and a senior associate of 8 or 9 years was leaving the firm to go work in the family business. The mentor that I ultimately got needed an associate to work with. So he called me in and he said, would you like to do commodity trading work? It's arbitration work. And I said, yeah, I might. And he said, do you know what demurrage is? It's an admiralty term. I gave him the definition and he said, oh, I'm going to work with you. You're the that, okay? My point is that I think the fact that I had taken things because both they were interesting but informative, I knew that maritime law was a very big part of a lot of different practices. And so I took the course just to learn something about it. Came in handy. That's what I was. Okay. Yes, you're. Switch it? Yes. That's right. Come on.
Earlier, but I'll ask you again. So I know you mentioned a little bit how you didn't get an offer from the firm you're working in. That was a hard setback. But generally, you know, when I hear about wonderful people, we hear a steady climb. You know, they tried this and then they got it. They tried this and they got it. But have you ever reached for something you really, really wanted and then you didn't get it? Like, I'm interested in the fall. How successful handle those really hard falls and how do you? Yes, I told you how I
The not getting the job.
But there were jobs I applied for
And I then analyzed why I,
and in one of them I realized
that I,
thought the interviews would be like a law firm.
and that I would,
Just ask the sort of general questions that you're expected to ask. And I realized I was really being asked a lot of questions about
that job and that office,
and I learned a very, very valuable lesson,
which
was I never ever applied
for another job where I
thorough
research on
what the office does, what it is they're looking for. I would find ways of reaching out to law school graduate friends of mine who were in the field or in that office and ask them,
what is it that they look for? What is it that they're doing that they're very excited about? And then I would try to tailor my interview to that. Didn't mean I got every job, but I got a lot more offers, okay? So one of the things about failure, any kind of failure, is that you can learn something from it, so long as you remain open to the possibility that it's something that you need to learn to do better. And I think that's how to handle failure. And I suspect that if I had had that interview again, that I would have figured out a way to get that job. And it probably turned out okay. I didn't get it because I applied to be a judge the year later. Sometimes you have to believe it to deal with some of these. But I truly believe every losing case that I try, I would dissect. And in doing that, one day I went to talk to the chief of my bureau, and he sat down with me and explained what I had done during the trial. And after I finished, she said, "You've analyzed it completely. It's very, very logical. But what I don't hear in your presentation is passion. I don't hear how you convinced the jury that they had to convict this person. I hear a set of arguments, but I don't hear an emotional belief in the arguments." And we talked a little bit about what that meant, how to present the argument, saying, you know, and after that experience, I had hung juries, but I never lost. And sometimes I've got. So failure is figuring out what you need to do not to fail the next time. Good luck.
Thank you.
And by the way, I failed writing in college, my book, and what work I did to figure out how to write. Okay, yes.
I'm Martha. I'm a second year at law school, and I was going to ask you about living with fear. You spoke about living with fear and having a support system, but how do you deal with living with fears that come up on a daily basis, like a case that hits home emotionally or admitting a mistake to a superior?
I can answer. That's always a big fear when you make a mistake, and we've all made mistakes. I think honesty gets you much further than dissemblance. And people respect more honesty than they do people who blame. I can tell you from personal, oh, thank you. You just have to swallow the fear and go in and say, I messed up. I made a mistake. But you don't go and do that without saying, I know what I did wrong, I've analyzed it, and I can assure you that I will do everything to undo this, but more importantly, that I'll never repeat this mistake. I think that I don't know any boss, especially for a young lawyer, who's ever going to not take that, even when they're angry at you. And if you make a fatal mistake, then that has to be a very valuable lesson. And anybody can get fired anytime. That's the reality of life. But it still will hold you better in terms of how people will treat you after you're fired, in the kind of recommendation they'll give you. If they hear you doing the things that I said were negatives, trying to blame others, denying it, they're going to bury you. If they hear that you've actually learned something, your recommendation may be a little less positive than you would have hoped, but it won't be so negative as to bury your opportunities in the future. Now, the first part of the question was, what do I do with cases that are personal? It's easy for me. I get dissents. All right? No. It really does. I can, if something disappoints me, I can write a dissent, and I can explain the why. And so that's cathartic in a lot of very meaningful ways, because that's the only way you can survive as a justice. Because when people disagree with you and you've been trying to shake them, it's the only way that lets you get out that angst, all right? As a lawyer, it's a lot harder. I've spoken to a lot of defense attorneys who have tried cases where they really, really believe their client is innocent, and it devastates them when their client gets convicted. And there's a lot of defendants who you're just doing the best job for them. And those are not that hard, okay? Because you're just trying to, you know they're guilty. And you're just trying to make sure that justice is done in a fair way, okay? But for those cases where you really, really believe it, you have to have a fundamental belief in the system. And I do. Not only are there appellate courts, but even when the Supreme Court gets it wrong, it can change its mind over time, it can limit its ruling, or Congress can overturn them. Now that last one is a little harder to have faith in right now. But you have to maintain a respect for the system you're in. Judges don't make all the rules. This is a combined work in progress by Congress, the president, by citizens who are pushing lawmakers to do the right thing. To me, faith in that process is what can let you live with the disappointments. Good luck. All right, PLI, NLI students, PLI, NLI students, where are your hands? Back there, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Shannon Zhu.
Hello.
Hi.
Where did you graduate from?
So,
Okay, come and take your picture. Go ahead.
so when I was a law student, I actually struggled with this pretty often. I'm sure a lot of my peers also did. We look at our role models, we look at you and we think, wow, they all went to Ivy League schools and they all accomplished so much. What advice would you give to students who beat themselves up thinking, darn, if only I got a higher LSAT score, if only I made it into law review, if only I got this summer job?
For every story like mine, there's an equal story of a lawyer who started out at Timbuktu, all right, law school, and has become a major leader in a field of law, who has become an important lawyer in a particular office. And certainly not everybody from those Ivy League schools graduates at the top of their class. All right? So it's not wishing for what could have been if you had done X, Y, and Z. It's proving that you have the determination to be successful on your own terms. And you live with that. You live with the fact that you may have to start at a lower rung, that you may not move ahead because people don't have high expectations of you, that they may overlook you sometime, but you keep on trying. Because the minute you give up is the minute that you've rendered everything you've worked for useless. As long as you're trying, even with the failures, as long as you keep pushing, trying to find those avenues, trying to fix those things that may be holding you back, studying in a different way, working in a different way, doing something to improve yourself so that you can get to a better place, it will happen. And I know that I was speaking to Deb earlier, or Lori, one of the two, I don't remember now, sorry guys, who said that one of the things they want to do next year is not bring people like me, but bring people who have gone to the schools you have, who have been very, very successful, because they're out there in droves. You're just not seeing them, but they're there. Good luck. All right, over there. Hello, Victor.
I am graduating from Cardozo, and I am a Court Justice Court.
It's a great place.
I know.
My friend Bob Katzman is here. Where is he? Where is Bob?
There,
Ah, you even know where he is?
I would just to first say thank you for being an inspiration to everyone in this room, but also to Latino immigrants like me. I came from Peru, and like you is just very inspiring. My question has to do with what kept you motivated in Princeton, in Yale, and then achieving what you do now. As you know, people with our backgrounds struggle a lot, so I would like to know at those stages in your life, what was the source of motivation?
My source of motivation is something that has been unique to me, but doesn't have to be unique to anyone else in terms of its bottom line lesson. As you may know, I am a juvenile diabetic. I was diagnosed at age 7.5. And at the time of my diagnosis, it's not true today, and I want to comfort any diabetic who's in the room. It was true then, it's not true now. That it was a prognosis for an early death back then. I didn't have an expectation that I would live much past 40. When I hit 50, I had a big party, and I announced to all of my family and friends that I had reached a time in my life that I never knew I would reach, never expected to reach, and that I thought the demons had finally been. But what that taught me and has been expelled is that condition made me realize the value of life. I understood from a very early age how precious life was. And I came away with this sense that I had to fill as much into my life as I humanly could. And I had to make every single day count. And so much so that my mother, who's always, my mother, if I get a little cut on my finger, wants to rush me to the emergency room, okay? And she drives me crazy. And at one time, she was driving me particularly crazy. And my brother called her up and said, "You're going to lose, Sonia, if you keep this up. Don't you understand that she is living a fuller and happier life than anybody else I know? If she dies tomorrow, she will have lived her life the way she wanted. Let her be." And it worked. Actually, my mother became much better at it. Not completely cured, but she... But that feeling, that recognition, you have to take the good and the bad, find the good in all the bad, take the good and not be satisfied with it, take the next step to do something more. That has to motivate you. At the end of each and every one of your lives, you have to be able to say, I made a difference. And it doesn't have to be a difference to be a Supreme Court justice. You can give in so many ways. You can give to local communities, you can give to school boards, you can give to community centers, you can work in hospitals. You can do almost anything, but you have to give in something. And so what motivates me, and that's why I've done as much service as I humanly can, it's why I'm here. Because giving is the way that I give myself meaning. So if you can find a way to keep that front and center, it can keep you going, help motivate you. All right, I'm back. Hi. All right. Hello, Megan. How are you?
Good, how are you?
We met inside.
Yeah.
All right, Megan.
All right, so this is...
Stand this way so I can...
This is a less serious question. I wonder if you or any of the other justices have an idea for maybe a cool nickname, like, for example, Justice Ginsburg, notorious RBG. Do you have any
You know, when I was a kid, I intimidated anybody who wanted to call me Sonny. I hated that. And nobody ever did. Because the first time they tried it, I would say, don't do that. And since I was a pretty tough kid, they didn't do that. Don't do that.
What can I say? Amazing. Thank you so much.
Can I go, or are you?
Yeah. We're adjourned.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
I have one favor to ask of all of you, which is a request from the justice that your photos, et cetera, not be posted on social media. That if there are tapes of things, you either delete them or just keep them to yourself. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Good evening, and thanks again for coming.